We'll kick off. It's 4 past, and we'll jump into today's topic. So today, I'll go back a slide just so everyone can see. Today, we're going to be looking at crafting effective prompts. Now, this is the very much foundation of getting the most out of large language models or generative AI tools. It's essentially the main skill that many people seek out of this course, and it's definitely something which is the most valuable. So before we jump in, let's take a recap of what we looked at last week. Last week we looked at we answered the question of what is, AI and what is generative AI. And I'll put this out to the people who were here last week. Does anyone feel comfortable coming off mute or popping in the chat about the answers to this question and what differentiates between the two? Because everyone knows what AI is, but what is the difference between AI and generative AI? So if you feel you want to take a stab at it, please do pop it in the chat, or if you feel a bit more comfortable, have a go to come off mute and yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can do, Anne. We can do.
Okay, I remember in the slide you had a generative AI refers to artificial intelligence that can generate new content or data that resembles human-generated examples. So that was the definition that I remember you putting up.
100%. Well, that's a fantastic response, and well done, because that's very much a case of what it is. You were spot on. That is perfect, and I'm very much impressed that you remember the slide. Even I forget what the slide is sometimes, and it can be a bit awkward when I do these sessions. But yeah, as Anne said, generative AI is in essence a branch of artificial intelligence that generates or creates content that otherwise could be mistaken for being human generated. Hence the word generative. Generative equals generated, and it's a very easy way to look at the two. AI is this sort of umbrella term when it comes to the ability of machines, computers having the ability to think. And I use that in air quotations because when you actually delve deeper, you actually see that it's a lot of mathematics and whatnot and statistics. Someone said that AI is just a fancy word for statistics, but I'll let them talk about that. And so when we look at the essence of this course, we're looking at the specific branch of AI that deals with the generative or generating new content from essentially thin air. Thumbs up if that made sense. Thumbs down if you're still a bit confused. And thank you very much for that answer, by the way.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Perfect. I'm seeing thumbs up. Wonderful. All right. Just got my tea over. All right then. So in today's session, oh sorry, that's one more slide. And to recap again, everyday examples of AI can be seen in our pockets. So for example, if you have an iPhone, that'd be Siri. Androids, you have, I believe it's Google Voice and whatnot. You have Alexa. It's very much baked into our lives at this point. But the difference is, and the main reason why there's a hype around it is because that wasn't generative AI. Instances like Siri, instances like Google Voice, Alexa are instances of AI in which they collect data from existing information and they'll fetch it for you and they automate that process. It's very different from, let's say, ChatGPT, which could actually, if you wanted to say, create a fake case study for something, that's what very much is suited for. So we'll crack on. So today we're going to be looking at the writing prompts for ChatGPT, and I want to stress something quite important here. We're going to be using ChatGPT as a vehicle for us to cover in this particular session. But as we looked at last week, there are multiple LLMs, or as we mentioned, large language models, where in which we can interact with them. And these concepts are universal to, in essence, any large language model that you interact with. So essentially, the reason why it is so important for writing effective prompts, and we'll go into this in a minute, and we'll look at some examples, is that by being able to write a understandable and essentially enhanced prompt, it allows you to unlock large language models to their full potential. Longer prompts with more information and detailed instructions are far better than shorter generic ones, and we'll see in a minute how those two contrast. There's a 5-step rule in which we sort of recommend, and don't worry if this doesn't land immediately. We're going to be going through this in today's session, and we'll be revisiting this in later sessions that have become very much baked into your mind, fingers crossed, by the end of the course. And that is context, task, instruction, clarify, refine. Now, again, you don't need to memorize this. You don't take a screenshot. Feel free to if you want to, but there's no pressure there. But it's a really simple technique, but a really powerful way of creating exceptional prompts that deliver you more accurate information and the actual output that you're looking for. And it, in essence, in a very much nutshell, it gives a large language model. In this case, we're going to be using ChatGPT, a clearer understanding of what you're going to be doing. A great example that we like to use is that imagine large language models or AI, or in this case, ChatGPT, is a super intelligent human, but it has zero context on what you want. It knows everything in the world, but it knows nothing about what you are seeking to get out of it. So with these sort of this 5-step technique, it allows you to establish foundations that you can really leverage and get the most out of this superhuman. Thumbs up if that made sense. Thumbs down if you're sort of like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, but need a bit more time. Perfect. And please don't feel pressure to not give a thumbs down. Those are really, really crucial for us and allows us to get some feedback on the fly. But let's keep moving forward. So the first part when it comes to writing a prompt is context. As we said, let's go back to the analogy of a superhuman who's in front of us. End of the day, this large language model is, well, this AI superhuman is something that knows everything in the world, but when it comes to interacting with us, similar to the way in which you ask someone, I'm not sure if anyone here deals with freelancers or anyone here has provided instructions or delegated tasks to individuals. Whenever you give someone a task, you need to provide context as to, well, what the task is. Granted, there are instances where you can say, well, pick that bottle up and point to the bottle. But in this case, there's no bottle to point to, right? You're dealing with a chat interface, and that's something that's really important. More formalized, it's a way in which you can provide that foundation for targeted answers. Without context, a response is very unlikely to be relevant or helpful. And, in this case, you can think of it also as similar as a conversation, with a friend. Providing that background information helps to ensure that the question is understood and allows for a more appropriate and useful response. And this is very, very key. Context is something where a lot of people we find who join or people that I've spoken to, for example, my mom, she loves ChatGPT. I'm pretty sure she signed up to the premium version, but when I look at her prompts, she doesn't provide that context, and that's really stopping her to get the most out of it. And it's something that everyone falls privy to, but hopefully we can make sure everyone here knows how to get the most out of writing prompts. So what I'd like everyone to do is actually, we're going to do some practice. So if you guys can all open ChatGPT, now just to be clear, feel free to use any large language model that is of your preference. In this case, we're using ChatGPT. As we discovered last week, ChatGPT is actually much better, or one of the best large language models that can do creative writing. So that comes really important in this session. Midhat will be putting the link in the chat. And please do not feel obliged to use the premium one. You can use the free version, and that's something which, we'll crack on with. From there, pick a prompt, grab it in there, play around with it, and see what it comes out with. I think it's something which, you may not have seen this level of interaction or the quality of answers before, but you should see how robust and in-depth the response is you're going to get using a prompt like this. And if I can get a thumbs up or people's thoughts when it comes to think of it. Okay, what we'll do, I'll copy and paste these into the chat. Once you've got a little response, if you can put a thumbs up in the chat, just so that you know where everyone's at. And also any thoughts and Did you make any adjustments? How did that turn out? Is it something new to you in that respect?
First, can you show us?
Yeah, we're going to be doing a walkthrough in a minute, probably. But if you click on the link in the chat from Midhat, you'll be able to actually copy and paste one of these into ChatGPT, and you can just see the sort of output you get. Okay. All right then. So I've got a quick question. Can someone tell me what ties all these four prompts together? If you have a look at, sorry, let's go back to presenting. Can someone tell me the concept in which all these four prompts have in common? So if we have a look at the first one, you are an experienced copywriter with high levels of expertise.
Context.
Pardon? Did someone shout it out?
Context.
Context, yeah, it does context. But is there something a bit more specific that we can pick out? Because we know this is set in the context, but is there something we can more pick out? Let's have a look at something in the chat.
You're giving them all a role,
a
specific level of experience, and a particular audience that they're playing to. So it's quite specific in terms of the steps you're going through.
Exactly. So we're almost, in essence, we can summarize this, and I can see Tommy has hit the nail on the head here, or along with Katie. Scott, yeah, to a degree, we'll find the mindset, but in more of a technical term, it is set in as the act as element. So this essentially allows us to say, well, act as an individual, and then we can almost add some layers into that experience, and we can take that somewhat. If we go back to the analogy of a superhuman, it's almost putting a mask on and putting a role on, in terms of like, okay, well, super clever, but I want you to act as a teacher in this instance, and this is the situation I'm in, and sharing almost the information from, why are you using the LLM, and how can you, the best way to almost get the AI to replicate you, hence why this course is called Creating Your Own Co-Pilot. How can you create that co-pilot, and how can you add that layering into it? So let's be honest, this can be quite draining at times when it comes to dealing with a lot of different prompts and stuff like that, and it gets quite tedious. But then this is where, and go back to here, this is where we saw last week that this link, prompts.chat, is actually really, really helpful. I know we glossed over it last week, but if we actually go back to this, and we can see how, let's say, we can see the section when it comes to the main body of the page. It's got all these different almost prompts for us to actually start and say, well, okay, instead of me having to think, what does how do I set the context and almost set the tone of voice for an English translator? You can come to this website, find what you want. So let's say, I think this may be quite relevant to a lot of people here, act as an Excel sheet, and you get some inspiration for how you can begin to craft that prompt for yourself. It may not be perfect for you right now, but at the same time or immediately, but you can then actually go over, we'll touch on this in a minute, you can refine it further and further to, really be in that, really mimic that super genius individual that you need to interact with. Thumbs up if that makes sense. Thumbs down if you're a bit confused. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat. If Midhat, we'll try and get back to you. If not, we'll revisit at the end of the session. So thumbs up if that makes sense. Thumbs down if yeah. Right. Lincoln, that's a really good question, Lincoln. If you could hold on to that and then pop it back in the chat at the end of the session, I think we can have a really cool conversation about that. And hopefully some of the later topics may answer that for you. Or if Midhat, if you have time, by all means. But yeah, let's move on. So prompting, the second element of this. So clear instructions are necessary for ChatGPT to generate text effectively, or very much a case of they're in essence for any large language model. And it's actually very key for us to, it's very key for us to give in essence, every single context, whenever we're dealing with LLMs. I say large language models because when we actually look at the wider sphere of generative AI, it's less important when it comes to tools such as like image generation or other visual elements in particular, because you don't need to tell like an image generation to act as a painter because it already generates images. But in very much the sense of ChatGPT, it's very important. So going into the second part of the task, something that I think would be quite crucial and something that would be really interesting is if you guys had to play around with these ones. So as you can see, we have about 4 different templates, and I don't want you guys to copy this directly, but instead the whole element here is to almost play around with it and start setting the context of things that will be quite relevant to you. So for example, you could say, you could take this first one and say your task is to write content that will be published online on websites, social media, email, newsletters. Your writing sounds informative, friendly, engaging, while incorporating humor and real life examples. But at the same time, there's something that's missing from this. And so I'd like for you guys to actually play around with it and see, and let us know what could be missing. In addition, all these 4 are stripped of something. So if you guys can have a play around and layering on with the context, how can we actually create more of an effective prompt? And so what I'll do is pop that here. Exactly, Tommy. So how can we then provide the sorry, how can we provide the context then to incorporate that into this? So that this one was an element of the task. Can you then actually build context around this prompt to then make it more, well, useful? And pick whichever prompt you'd like, and then have a play around and see what you get back out of it. And I'll give you guys about 2 minutes, and then once everyone's done, we can So again, once you've had a play around with layering in the context of a prompt, please feel free to share what you added. And also, if you can pop it in the chat and what you got back from it. And just also a thumbs up once you're ready to move on. And any questions, do feel free to come off mute. We've got about 2 minutes to answer any questions, or pop it in the chat if you would like.
I have a question.
Go for it.
I had the third one, and I said to make activities and accommodations to assist and inspire people visiting Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, very historic town. And it gave me a layout of spa resorts, but it didn't give me business addresses, or it was very generic in a response. How would I get, if I want to do that, how would I get it to give business addresses, or more suggested, how could I rate it to, would I have to say provide business addresses to get it to do that?
Oh, you're jumping into unfortunately I can't see who's speaking. Who's speaking at the moment? I'm so sorry. Larry, sorry, Larry. Oh, you're Larry, you're one step ahead of everyone, or one step ahead of yourself.
Okay.
So
I'll wait.
You know what? I'm just gonna where's everyone at? Do people need a bit more time? 'Cause I think it's a perfect way to segue into the next part of what are we talking about? But okay, going away from more specific, Larry, is there anything you could have changed in the initial prompt in respect to context that could have set that? So thinking about, how could you have shifted the context of the prompt to, so you said, your task is is to make suggestions for activities and accommodation to assist and inspire people visiting.
You could have said budgetary restraints of, $100 a night or $200 a night for accommodations.
Those are instructions. How can we almost do that as well? And the reason why I'm being quite pedantic here is that if we're able to optimize each element of our prompt writing, it means that we don't have to focus on hyper-specific one part. So it's like, before this before this task, an alternative could be saying, I'm visiting Gettysburg for a weekend, and I'd like to see so what was the museums, did you say? Or a particular type
Yeah.
of business here?
Battlefield. Say the battlefield. Yeah, the
Okay,
battlefield.
yes.
Yeah.
So then setting context in this case would be a situation where, oh, well, I'm visiting Gettysburg. I'm really interested in battlefields and whatnot. I think geography is off. My history is not the best with with America, but I assume that's to do with the Civil War.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in Civil War and the Civil War, US Civil War. See the differences. Your task is to make suggestions for activities and accommodation to assist and inspire me visiting Gettysburg. So
Oh,
do you see how that layering already? Well, we know specifically, as you know, Joe said, provide business addresses of accommodations, museums, and historic sites at Gettysburg. Yep, that's very much along the lines. But also here, we can just say, well, what we're interested in, and that way we don't need to be explicit when it comes to giving the actual task.
I got it.
Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Thank you.
Anytime, anytime. Cool. We've got some really cool stuff. Mike has employed it to write content to be published on online websites and social media. That's really cool. You've been very specific about the writing style. Nice. In terms of, oh, sorry, you pulled it from pulled it from there, my bad.
Plagiarism, I believe it's called.
Well, there's a session later on. This is my last session for a couple of weeks, and I'm back to give you guys all about a lecture about plagiarism and privacy. So buckle up for that, everyone. All right, then. We're going to crack on. I think this is quite cool. Please feel free to put it in the chat so that people can have a read back through if they would like. But I'm going to assume that everyone's had some time to play around with these and has actually incorporated some context setting into and set that foundation into the task. I just started listening, but yep, Dennis, that's a really good point. That's a nice constraint. But almost going back to what Larry touched upon, is the instructions. And this is where I think everyone's sort of running into seeing almost like limitations of not focusing on not being explicit on the instruction that you give to ChatGPT. So for example, in Larry's example, he said, well, Gettysburg as the area, but he didn't specify that he wants business details, addresses, and more nuanced areas for battlefields and whatnot. So it's actually really important to provide, detailed instructions. And again, if we want to sort of think about what's a rule of thumb that we can almost abide by, and we can almost sort of like rope learn as a means to, particularly while you're getting started on your generative AI journey. And that is, it can be, from overall tone of the post, its length, who should the output be aimed for, and very much think about, well, if you're writing a specification, and if you were essentially writing a checklist to hand the task over to a human, what would you need to include? Now, don't get me wrong, over time, you'll figure out things such as context building within large language models. You also figure out things such as, setting the context in of itself. But you don't need to be so explicit in the instruction element of a prompt. But at the same time, though, it's really, really important to be very explicit when it comes to the outputs. I know we have a mix of UK and US learners here. Apologies if anyone else is not from those two countries, but something so small that many people tend to gloss over, particularly, individuals here in the UK, is the fact that most large language models give an output of Americanized English. And I'll be honest, it's quite funny when we get tasks and essentially end of course assignments where individuals who are based in the UK suddenly change their vernacular to American English. But at the same time, it's very obvious, and it's something which shows us, well, you've used a large language model, but you haven't been explicit in terms of, detailing the output. Does that make sense? Thumbs up, that makes sense. Thumbs down if that's a bit, yeah, so. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Frank. All right. So in essence, we're going to have a look here in regards to, and again, we've learned about context, we've learned about task. So the aim now here is to actually layer those two elements onto these interaction elements or parts of the prompt. So I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat. And taking what we've just learned and what we've just covered, we're going to actually go back and I want you guys to add in, set the context for the prompt, also set in the task, and then use this to specify the output or specify the interaction. Or alternatively, if you're building up your own prompts using the previous two exercises, do feel free to add this in there. Any questions, please do feel free to come off mute or just pop it in the chat. I'll have a quick look in the chat to see if there's any other questions. Mike, in addition to Midhat's answer to your question about how good is ChatGPT about geography, there is a tool called Perplexity, which is a free research tool. We cover that in later sessions, but it's actually fantastic when it comes to doing, I guess, relevant information.
What was the name of the tool?
Perplexity.
Complexity.
I'll just show you Perplexity. It's just here. It's really great. As you can see, I've been using it all day today, and actually some of those on the left are from our previous examples, but it's my go-to actually when it comes to, honestly, I'll pop it in the chat here. We have a whole session we're going to cover about how to actually use Perplexity, and it's a fantastic tool when it comes to research and whatnot, but again, that's almost like a spoiler. Play around with it. But yeah, if you don't want to pay, and as we always mention, you shouldn't feel obliged to financially pay for a large language tool. Perplexity is your go-to as it's free of charge.
Thank you.
Anytime. And yeah, sorry, just to reiterate Midhat's point, information does change, but something to be aware of, guys, is if you are using ChatGPT and using the free version, the cutoff date for its information, as we looked at last week, ChatGPT is a pre-trained model in the sense that it was fed all this information that is up to a certain point, so that is December 2021, and it has no knowledge after December 2021. So for example, if it asked, Americans, you may be confused by this, but just bear with me. If it asked who won in the Arsenal game on the weekend, Arsenal versus Bayern Munich, it wouldn't know about that. Arsenal is one of the best football teams, and football is not played with an egg, Americans. It is played with a ball, but that is a hill I'll die on another day. And you know what? You are really lovely and don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable about the fact that our sport is better. But we'll leave that for another day. All right, then. Can I get a thumbs up once everyone is done? And yes, John, the old hand egg joke. Yeah, it is indeed. Forget a thumbs up once you guys have played around with it. And what did you guys get out of it? What did you layer with this interaction prompt? And so what did you utilize? Joe, that is not a crazy question. There is actually a website that one of our previous students, previous learners, not students, you guys are learners, turned blog writer Paul, he now writes blogs for us, actually shared, and I will send that out at the end of the session, so you guys can have a look at that. I'll make sure I put it in the recap email. But yeah. Thumbs up once you've managed to add in some context and also add in a task. And now you've laid that on with the interaction element of the prompts that were shared. Just conscious looking at time. So thumbs up if you're done. Please do share anything generated, any questions that you may have. Building off the travel guide prompt, you've narrowed it down to families with children. Lindsay, I think that's going to be a very, very popular prompt. So please do feel free to share it, particularly wherever stage you're at right now. I have young nieces and nephews, and I'll definitely use that when it comes to babysitting the next time and taking them out for a day in London. All right, then let's move on then. So we've talked about context, we've talked about tasks, we've talked about interaction, and I'm guessing everyone has hit enter and they've got back a response. But can I ask if everyone is happy with the first response from ChatGPT that they've got? Thumbs up if you are, thumbs down if you're not, and you think it could be it missed the mark or could do with some, so to speak. Oh, surprising that. Well, okay, well, that sort of changes my next point. Well, there's another element where in which we can actually elevate that answer to something that is far, far more comprehensive and aligned with what we're looking for, particularly when it comes to large scale tasks or sort of more verbose questions to ask it. And this part simply, Katie, okay, there's one person who may what's it called? May align with this in terms of that is clarifying. And this part is dead simple. It's simply asking ChatGPT whether it understands the context, the task, and instruction, and whether, and a lot of times it will repeat out your prompt back to you and demonstrate that it comprehends a task. And this may seem really benign and really simple, but it's actually a great way for us to understand, well, okay, have I entered the right information? And have I actually given ChatGPT something that it's understood correctly and does it understand what I want to get out of it? And we can look at an example of this. So this is a screenshot where in which someone has asked ChatGPT, and it's quite long. I won't read it all out. So please do feel free to come back to this if you're in a recording, or take a couple of seconds. But you are an experienced content writer with high levels of expertise, authority within the general tech industry. Your job is to write content that will be published on websites, social media, email newsletters, and advertisements, such and such forth, and it goes along. And the real key thing here that allows us to see, well, is this prompt good? And this is a great way to sense check in terms of, are we writing effective prompts, is by just saying, do you understand? And one thing I want to make sure is very clear, ChatGPT is not just going to take what you gave it to it and just spit it back right out to you. If I picked up my iPhone and gave Siri a question, it's more than likely that it's just going to take what I said, copy it, and essentially paste it back to me. But as we know that large language models are generative AI, it generates content out of what we provided it. So if it generates the wrong response, we know that there's something, or not necessarily the wrong response, or the thing that we're not exactly looking for. We know there's something gone slightly wrong in regards to our prompting. And this is a great way for us to come back to this. But then going on to the next part, how do we do that? Any takers for how we can actually then go back and say, well, we need to change this? Do we start again? Any takers? Dennis, I can see you shaking your head. You're not sure? Is that thumbs up if you're not sure? Thumbs down.
No idea.
No idea? No idea. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Do we throw away our laptop and buy a new one? What do we do? Turn it on and off again? Classic trick, but it doesn't really work in this situation. Yeah, I think some people are hitting it on the head. So Alan, how do we reset the context? We don't actually need to reset the context. San suggested it. And also Frank, we clarify. And this is where it becomes really useful. And we'll do this in, actually we'll pull up ChatGPT and we'll go for a little spin. Oh, am I gonna get booted out? Just close that down. Cool. So as we can see here, if someone give me a prompt, any prompt. Well, someone give me a prompt in the chat. Come off mute, just let me know what's happening there. No takers? No?
There's one which I think was Steven Pinker originally. It was, if Faz is alive at breakfast time and Faz is alive at night time, was he alive at lunchtime?
That actually delves into something a bit more philosophical when it comes to large language models' ability to answer questions, Mike. So I may have to take.
All right, if it was, I was just sort of trying my luck a bit. I did try.
No, that's completely fair. That's completely fair. And actually deals with the logic aspect and its understanding of interpreting human language. I think is actually something what we can talk about at the end of it. And I think it raised a really good point. Let's talk about something in regards to. I want to create a blog for Coding Codex. And our aim is to empower individuals who are looking to take their first step into coding. That's why we exist. That's why we're here. Doesn't matter who you are, your socioeconomic status, neurodiversity, wherever you are from the world. your age. We are here to champion those individuals. So let's say I want you to give me 10 blog titles for my website that teaches coding, teaches tech skills. And can anyone tell me what I'm missing from this prompt? We've covered this just now. I'll zoom in so people can see. Please feel free to pop in the chat, come off mute if you feel comfortable enough. Role, exactly. Yeah, context. Well, we've got context. Yeah, actually, yeah. So I run a social enterprise. Let's put technical education institution. And institution. You need to act as a role as the world's best blog writer. I want you to give me 10 blog titles for my website that teaches tech skills. And
what about audience?
Audience. This
should writing for a 10-year-old versus somebody who's reskilling from C++ or whatever.
Yeah. So let's omit that just so we can go into the point of clarification, Mike. But I love how you're thinking one step ahead. It's fantastic. I love that. It's fantastic. So let's hit enter. So as we can see, it's got 10 guides. So beginner's guide to coding, understanding AI, 10 essential skills, and such forth. Now, these are okay. The problem is that, well, as Mike just said, who's the audience? And we didn't include that in the prompt. Now, there is a possibility for me to actually go up here, and I'm not sure if everyone can see, there's a ability for me to edit this, but if I'm honest, the problem with that is that you lose the nature of a large, come back, it's fine. You lose the element of having that conversational ability with large language models and treating it like your personal assistant, co-pilot, right? So instead, this is why it almost looks like a chat room, where in which we can say, okay, well, these are fine, but let's think about the audience, which Mike suggested, but we purposely didn't include an initial prompt. And that's where we can say, okay, refine or make the titles accessible to and relevant to individuals. I think I spelled that wrong, but artificial intelligence is just that, intelligent. So my terrible spelling tends not to actually influence its ability to understand what we're talking about. Can anyone give me who's an audience that we should cater to? Someone give me an audience. Young adults, perfect. Young adults, and you know what? Let's do both. And people over the age of 60. It's an interesting mid-ground, but let's see what it comes out with. But already what we can see that it's pulled in the context, and this is where large language models are fantastic in terms of it will put in the context of what you've already said in this initial statement, and it will then actually take the refinement you've given, and it will then shoot something out that actually matches, essentially, in essence, it's combining this prompt and that prompt together, and like a simple equation, and we've got these. Now, I'm not sure whether these are for young people and individuals over the age of 60. I'm sure there's some mid-ground somewhere, but I think it requires us to actually delve back and forth and give more context. And this is where the whole essence of refinement, this whole essence of engineering really comes into play. I'm not sure if anyone has seen, but if you go into freelancing websites such as Upwork, Fiverr, individuals are essentially charging for this skill set in of itself because people have spent time just going back and forth and whatnot. LT, should you always start a new chat or so it doesn't use old stuff? That's a fantastic question, LT. It's a way for us it's really important for us to understand, well, when do we need to use a new chat? So in this case, we've set our superhuman, when this gets ChatGPT, to be a blog writer. Now, of course, at any point I can say, now be the world's best coder and provide me a Python script to automate my emails. And it can switch context in that aspect. But at the same time, as Midhat says, it depends on what context you're using it for. And I guess sort of a rule of thumb is saying that, if you can keep things such as there's one particular role or one particular role you want it to play in, let's say one chat, and it allows you to switch things back and forth. And it means that when you're trying to locate piece of information, it's not that difficult. So as we can see here, this is a rudimentary example of someone using refinement. So someone goes, how many letters are in the word inaccurate? And you can see ChatGPT has said inaccurate has 9 letters. Someone goes, I'm sure, are you sure? And it's a way of sort of going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I'm pretty sure there's borderlines gaslighting ChatGPT. Lucky it doesn't have any emotion, so it's not the end of the world. But it's something which, it's a really, really crucial skill and will allow you to refine your prompts and get to that next level and get to that point where you are writing fantastic prompts. You don't have to think about it. So finally, at the end of the point, this is where we can see a really good prompt that has been stitched together. It's taken some time to generate, but actually is an amalgamation of some of the prompts that we've seen throughout the session, and it puts it all together. And this is an example. Feel free to take a screenshot or come back to the recording if you want to look at it. Again, prompts.chat, the link we saw at the beginning, is a really great place to see different types of and get inspiration for different types of prompts that are really well written, and allows us to get some inspiration and have a starting point. But hopefully with these 5 different things, it means that, it's a lot easier. Now, let's go over some quick tips. I know we're pressed for time. We're going to quickly skip over this. We'll quickly breeze through this. We've got about 5 different tips to sort of go through that can be quite, quite useful. So as someone just asked in terms of, I believe it's LT, we can go ahead and create a new chat. But let's say, for example, we don't want to do that. A really nice way to say, okay, you want to start afresh, but you don't want to create a new chat, is by literally telling, again, almost like the superhuman there, ignore all previous prompts in this conversation and it will reset. And it's a really nice trick to have, particularly if you're pressed for the number of tabs you can have open, or you just want to keep everything concise in a singular singular window and you don't want to start again. But at the same time, it's a nice trick to have. Another essence is, as we've seen, ChatGPT can very much spew out a lot of information for us. So as we can see here, I've asked for some code, but it's given me all this other information. As a developer myself, I just care about this information. So the real nice thing is that say, well, we can ask for the answer only, and we can ask for the large language model to ignore all the elements of conversation that may go around it and say, mandate, I just want the blog, or I just want the businesses in Gettysburg that Larry should go visit when he goes to visit Gettysburg, and just be very direct. And if you are writing blogs and whatnot, sorry, skip to number 4. Getting something in Markdown is a lot easier to copy and paste it into websites. Also, AI is really apologetic. If you're British, like myself, it can be a bit jarring. I find it a bit frustrating because it does slow down the response time. So you can just say, don't apologize. Just on a reply to response, and you can set it to have the tone of voice that you're looking for and is most effective for you. And finally, you can use parentheses or square brackets to separate instructions about tone and writing style from the task itself, which is really helpful and whatnot. So we can see here, this is an example of a Markdown output. But that brings us to the end of the session, and to again just go over the 5 different prompts that we've looked at. So again, it's 5 elements of writing a great prompt. We've got context, task, instruction, clarify, refine. Don't worry if you haven't memorized this. Don't worry if you already realizing that you might have forgotten. You need to set context, or you need to add some instructions. This will come with time. Please do feel free to take a screenshot or come back in the recording and definitely play around with that. I think we've already covered the final response, so we'll just go into the end of the session. I'll put this up for people to see. Again, it takes time. It takes, you have to really go back and forth with the skill. It's a skill in itself, writing prompts. That's why you have things such as prompt engineers. But hopefully over time, through the rest of these sessions in the course, you'll be able to actually perfect that skill. And that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can get in contact with us at hello@codingwithcodex.co.uk. Any questions you have outside of sessions and whatnot, this is a way to get us in contact with us. And if you haven't done already, if you did come a little bit late to the session, please do make sure to check in. It's really key. It allows us to monitor who's turning up and who is going to be getting that accredited certificate of completion at the end of the course. And I guess this is where, if you guys do want to stay on, have any questions, please do feel free to pop it in the chat, come off mute, and we'll leave about 5 to 10 minutes for questions and answers. But yeah. You're very welcome, guys. If you need to go, please do go. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys. Well, you'll hear from me in the update email tomorrow with this links recording. Yeah, Mike.
How how specific is what you've gone through today to ChatGPT versus Gemini? I mean, for example, the one I plagiarized from Steven Pinker about being alive in the morning and the evening, I tried on both. ChatGPT was much more philosophical about it and said, oh, it depends, blah, blah, blah. Gemini basically said, probably, but there are a few possibilities. So I think that tied in with what you said last week about ChatGPT being more, for want of a better word, creative, textual versus more factual on the Gemini side. What you've described there today, how much of that can be sort of moved across to Gemini?
So everything that we talked about today is universal. We very much base these sessions on first principles. I'm not sure if you're familiar with engineering, but that is actually when you break concepts down into their very much fundamental aspects. We sort of looked at generative AI and thought, okay, what are the first principles of AI? And that is this technique of writing prompts. And so we've tailored this, we've essentially extrapolated the skill sets that are universal to any large language model. Now, when you mentioned, that that prompt, that does delve into the, as you mentioned, and you rightly so, correlated with the ability and what the model is able to infer and what it's able to actually replicate that human-like thinking and analysis of problems. But then when we look at the prompts, it's more to do with the instructional element of things. So it's actually saying, well, generate me these specific tasks, and it mimics more of a human's actions that can be delivered. So in the case of, again, go back to Larry's thing, Larry's ability to actually say, well, you know what, he needs to find X number of places in Gettysburg. He can do that on ChatGPT, or he can do it on Gemini. He can do it on Hugging Face or Perplexity. It really doesn't matter. But at the same time, if you then want to delve into something more philosophical, that's where you step away from prompt engineering, and that's where you actually look into more natural language processing. And when we're looking at, okay, so how does it interpret the literal instructions there? And that's why the prompt that you suggested is actually very much a gotcha, because it actually is a stress test. And it's really, I've seen instances, and for example, when it comes to legal elements, that's where, large language models are very much not struggle with, but there's definitely large discrepancies between different tools. So ChatGPT versus Gemini. If you put in legal questions, that's where you may see very large differences in their responses. But very much going back to the structure and what we've covered in today's session, it's something which is universal to all tools. I hope that's answered your question. I'm sort of doing a politician's answer where I'm not explicitly answering it because it is a bit above my pay grade. And I'm not too well rehearsed in natural language processing, so I couldn't give you an explicit answer. All right,
Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome. Lincoln?
Yeah, so just going back into kind of the instructions and basically building out custom GBTs compared to actually doing prompts and things like that. So if I'm having a repetitive process, this is going to be continuous. I'm doing it lots of times. I have the knowledge base built out with all of my article exports, whatever from Metabase or whatever database you're using. So it knows a lot of different information on different companies or whatever information you want to have it know. Obviously, you can get into more depth on the knowledge and everything, but then what is the difference between what would you guys have you guys pinpointed what you put in the instructions versus what you're actually going to be asking it in the messages? I know it's because I've run into the issue where I can have all of these instructions, have a big mass file of instructions, and then I have lots of information and knowledge, and then I'm asking it questions in the messages, but it, I don't know if you're understanding, like I'm trying to get my words out correctly,
Oh, no,
but
no, it's fine, it's fine. Think of it. Could you could you contextualize? Could you give an example?
yeah, so if I'm building out a custom GBT to basically be an expert for a company,
Mhm.
you know, just an expert for, let's say, a software.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a software expert. You're building that out. You give it all of the documentation within the knowledge portion of the custom GBT, obviously.
right. Yeah.
And then within the instructions, you're going to kind of give it specific instructions on what you want it to perform.
Mhm.
Like, so we get that point done. Okay, that's all good. But then when we're actually sending the messages, how much of that should we include? Like when you're going over the parts of the prompt, how much of the prompt should we still include in that message, even though it's also included in those instructions?
So if I can just reiterate that back to you, just so that I
Mhm,
understand situation. So let's say I have the Coding Codex custom GPT, and we use it for all of our instructors um, to do their onboarding. And
mhm.
so all of the relevant information when it comes to safeguarding, when it comes to policies, when it comes to procedures, anything that may, call me up at 2 a.m. in the morning, it's all in there, and they don't need to contact myself or they don't need to contact anyone else. You're asking how much can we then abstract away from the actual prompts that let's say Mid Hat's created that, and then I then interact with it. Do does Mid Hat have to consider essentially the bulk, or do I then can I just put in like a very layman's like, oh, what is X, and will I be able to get back a full verbose answer because of
Yeah,
this context? Um,
pretty much like the idea of it is to build it out for an entire team, an entire company to use for people that don't know how to communicate with LLMs.
so so shameless plug, they should be in this session.
Yeah, right.
So if you want, you've got our email. If you want to set that up, by all means, we'll have to do one-off thingies. But I'd be remiss by not mentioning that. Unfortunately, we're at a situation where we're seeing um effectively a chatbot like yeah. Sorry, Matt, you answered another question. Essentially, there's no way around it, and this is why we're seeing that massive step difference, and there's that tangible and obvious improvement with someone who knows how to write effective prompts and what they get out of it. It's very difficult. I think we're now slowly starting to see technology which can actually take a couple words and then actually infer based on a bunch of different data points. But again, if we go back to that sort of analogy of a superhuman, the superhuman has, all the information about, let's say, Google in this instance. But the individual has to be good at that information retrieval. And
Mhm,
that's a skill in which you can't really get away from that, because if the individual just says, tell me X, and doesn't specify the context, doesn't specify what it actually needs, it's just going to get a flood of information about the same way in which Googling, using the search engine is a skill in of itself. We joked when I was at university studying computer science, we used to joke saying that we paid, thousands of pounds or thousands of dollars for learning the art of Googling in of itself, because that is querying that search engine does require a lot of practice. So unfortunately, there isn't a case where you can completely get rid of informing people and educating them on the skill of writing prompts and effective prompts. You can definitely speed up the process by providing custom GPTs, or you can also have like shortcuts if you really want to get technical. So for example, let's say go back to that coding with Codex custom GPT, or let's say there's an application elsewhere, and there's a shortcut to say, instead of me asking what is being taught next week, I just say taught next week. They'll pick that up as a shortcut. But
mhm.
unfortunately, you can't get around. Yeah, you do need to
Yeah.
educate people about them. Yeah, I'm
My
sorry.
workarounds at the moment, just to get like tell you guys what I've been doing with that, is within the knowledge, basically I have use cases like a long list of spreadsheet full of use cases that are possible things that people might offer, like things that people might ask. And then also it'll respond to that. It gives a response, like an example response. And then
Mhm.
I also have I've deployed to a team basically a software that's going to take them through and pull variables from their CRM or whatever they're to use, and structure these messages for them. So it's just copy and pasting messages into ChatGPT.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. Um, Trying to think. I can't. I mean, I can get back to you, but I can't foresee any way to sort of skate around that. Um, the actual element. I mean, Midhat, if there's any suggestions, please feel free to come off mute if you can think of anything. He's been busy manning the chat. I didn't even call him.
I know. I'm sorry for taking up all this
No,
time with this question.
no. I'm sure. I mean, everyone's welcome to jump off if you like, but I'm sure everyone's here because they're interested to hear about it. But in essence, there's no way of getting around it. That's why prompt writing is a skill in of itself. That's why it's a paid skill now, as we've seen in the past 18 months. But yeah, I hope that. Well, unfortunately, I couldn't give you a direct answer, but yeah. Any more for any more? It's 6 o'clock on the dot. Not sure what time it is for you Americans. You guys are like 4 time zones. It's all very confusing. But yeah, if thank you very much for coming, guys. I'm sorry, ladies and individuals. Please do feel free to get in contact with us. Brandy, have a wonderful rest of the day. Joe, have a great evening. And I look forward to seeing everyone next week. All right, take care, guys. Bye.